Hey everyone, and welcome back to another industry report. Google are about to announce what is set to be their largest move into the gaming industry. With an announcement looming at GDC 2019, we have a hell of a lot to talk about, with Google snapping up major executives from across the gaming industry and teasing something new on their hardware store. Gaming is a hard industry to break into, but if anyone is to do it, well, it's probably Google, given their resources and their internet infrastructure. As always, we need to start by looking at the history. So Google have been trying to get into gaming for quite some time. Of course, so far it's not really led to anything, but that's set to change. Their 2014 controller patent, which features many Google-like things such as a Google voice assistant button, has recently been recirculated in the news cycle. That's not all that we have to talk about though with Google hardware. Google Project Yeti is something that has been rumored for quite some time, with a paywalled 2018 report claiming that Yeti hardware was being led by Mario Juarez and Majid Bakar, who are VPs of product management and hardware over at Google. That hardware project has been running for 2 or 3 years, but it's not just hardware, with Yeti also being rumored to have a streaming service component, something that makes a great deal of sense when you look at what Google do as a company. Piping video down the internet is really something that they're pretty darn experienced with. More recently though, Google ran a streaming beta test that had Assassin's Creed Odyssey stream through Google's Chrome internet browser. How well did this streaming test run? Well, I did not play it, but Polygon's impressions were actually quite strong, reporting low latency and excellent visuals. After a quick browser test, your game essentially launches and you're right into it, launching faster than just running it on your computer, and it essentially looks similar to being on your own hardware. From what they said, it was essentially near flawless on the author's gigabit wired connection on a computer with a 1080, which is expected, but moving over to a wireless connection on the same network and a MacBook Pro 2017, it was just as good. That does bode quite well. Now sure, it was a gigabit connection, but downstream doesn't matter that much. It's really all down to latency, less than bandwidth. So this shows that it worked quite decently over a wireless network, so probably a 20 to 40 ping connection. And while this does bode well, it is true that games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey are pretty tolerant to input lag. After all, they're not Twitch shooters, so problems would not be picked up on Assassin's Creed Odyssey that would be picked up on a first-person shooter. But still, 60 FPS on the Chrome browser might feel better than 30 FPS on a console with bad frame timings and the input lag of a large TV. So overall, it seems like the Chrome streaming experience for the beta was quite good. Past this though, Google has also hired Phil Harrison, who reports to their VP of hardware and was an executive in Sony for 15 years and Microsoft for 3. So as you can see here, from the background, Google have clearly been working on a gaming product for quite some time, and that brings us to the latest wave of news. And this all starts off with the hiring of Jade Raymond, who is a very notable figure in the gaming industry. She graduated with a BSc in computer science in 1998 and went on to become a programmer at Sony, where she helped create Sony Online's R&D group. She then moved to EA and was a producer for The Sims Online, eventually heading over to Ubisoft, where she produced Assassin's Creed 1 before going on to executive produce Assassin's Creed 2 and heading up new IP at Ubisoft, most notably of course the Watch Dogs IP. She then was reportedly setting up a new Ubisoft studio in Toronto before she moved over to EA to start EA Motive, while also being key at Visceral Games. She then ended up leaving EA and has now just announced that she will be a VP at Google. So she has a lot of experience setting up studios and producing games, and also benefits from having a strong technical knowledge from her earlier years in the industry. And that ties into what we've seen from Google's hardware VP, who has tweeted about his excitement surrounding the future of gaming at GDC and what Google has. Now, the two people behind Project Yeti report directly to him. We have then seen a Google video teasing the event, with it saying, "Gather around as we unveil Google's vision for the future of gaming at GDC 2019. But that is not all. Google are also currently running a teaser page on the Google hardware store. Yeah, that's the same store that you would purchase a Pixel or a Google Home device from. That makes it fairly clear that they have a hardware announcement in the works. So, major gaming executives are now at the company. The beta test of their Assassin's Creed Odyssey stream through Google Chrome seems to have been quite a success, at least on a technical level. We know that they have gaming hardware projects in the works, with major announcements clearly being teased. One thing is for sure here. Google are going to make a large move into the gaming market very soon. So what does that mean for us? Well, on the hardware side, it could go in a few different ways. First, it could essentially just be a souped up Chromecast, likely with a bespoke hardware decoder, something like that. That would heavily rely on the streaming beta, which seems to have worked out quite well, so that seems like a good idea, and this would be a pretty low-cost offering that would deliver great results to those with solid internet. It wouldn't be great for rural areas, though, but we need to take everything in context. Google are clearly targeting well-connected cities first. This hardware is a part of a broader picture for them as a company, and that is one that includes Pixel, Google Home, Google Wi-Fi, and they are kind of more city products in my head. At least I think that's how it is. Now, the next option is to just be their take on the NVIDIA Shield box, a device that has strong enough hardware to run some titles natively, but relies on a streaming component for games that demand really strong hardware. So maybe something with a Tegra X2 in it that could play many indie titles well, and be significantly more powerful than, say, Nintendo Switch, which has a Tegra X1, which already is something that's powerful enough to support a surprisingly wide array of titles, even though it's somewhat underclocked. Then the final option is to launch a fully fledged gaming console with hardware to compete with Sony and Microsoft. And you know what? I think that is really unlikely. It just does not leverage what Google is strongest at as a company, and that is the internet. Any console announced now and for a close release would not be competing with the Xbox One or the PS4 for the majority of its lifetime. Instead, it would be competing with the PS5 and the Xbox One's successor. I just don't think Google can pull that off. They haven't made any major hardware acquisitions, well, in this space anyway, so it seems like one of the first two options is more likely. A Google streaming box that's powerful enough to play some games on its own, plus a Google streaming service that would be available anywhere, your phone, your desktop computer through Chrome, and their game streaming box, which could either be a souped-up Chromecast or a slightly more powerful, significantly more powerful, NVIDIA Shield-like device. Where does Jade Raymond come into the picture? Well, I'd imagine she'd be there to oversee the content ecosystem. It's impossible to say exactly what she's going to do, but it could range from kicking off studios owned or funded by Google, to funding exclusives from other studios, to just leading developer adoption efforts. It certainly is an interesting situation, and it definitely is poised to be disruptive. Currently, we see that both Sony and Microsoft have streaming services, with Sony's being available right now, it's called PS Now, and Microsoft soon being in beta, and it's called Project xCloud, and it was recently demoed alongside their Master Chief Collection announcement as a part of an Xbox Inside stream. When you look at the fundamentals of the three companies here, Sony are probably the weakest in this regard. Microsoft are very well established in terms of their network architecture sort of space with their Azure cloud offering, while Google are, of course, Google. Through YouTube, their search engine, and their many other cloud-based products, they are very well set up for a game streaming service. Sony were the first to the punch, though, and that is pretty much because they purchased a company called Gaikai in 2012. Fundamentally, though, I think Google are well set up to disrupt this space, and it's a space that right now doesn't really see wide adoption. NVIDIA's GeForce Now streaming service, after all, is still in beta, Sony's PS Now is still quite limited, so the stage really is set for Microsoft and Google to fight for market dominance. Assuming both are able to deliver acceptable performance, it's all going to come down to the game library and how easy it is to get on board, and that's where Microsoft do have a bit of advantage, at least with the game library. They have Game Pass that contains their major first-party titles like the Halo franchise, as well as many other third-party ones, for a total of 250 titles. I'm not sure if Google will be able to compete with that game offering, at least not initially, but we have seen a bit of a hint at what they could do, which is to get major publishers on board. Their streaming service was testing Assassin's Creed Odyssey and required a Uplay account. So what if Google locked down Ubisoft? Ubisoft don't have a subscription service of their own, so it would purely be an expansionary thing for them. Now, that is not the case for, say, EA, who have Origin access, so, would a Google-compatible streaming service work with that? Would you need both of them? A lot really does ride on the specifics of Google's streaming service and how this actually is implemented. Do they plan to open it up as a marketplace where games can be purchased? Perhaps having agreements with, say, EA that would allow for their games to be streamed on it as well, but maybe still be purchased through Origin? Or do they plan to just have a monthly subscription service that is a bit more like Game Pass, or a hybrid of both? Perhaps they'll go hard after indies, but that's all guesswork right now. But more than ever, the industry is a rather complex web. For an example, while they did this test with an Ubisoft title, well, Ubisoft's The Division 2 is an Epic Game Store exclusive. Okay, it does hook into Uplay, but that could be a spanner in the works for some of the more complex dealings that they might want to do if they wanted to lock down exclusives for their streaming service. Of course, it could be quite simple. They would just have Uplay, Origin, etc., just have clients run natively on their new hardware device with the streaming offering being integrated. After all, the Epic Game Store does just hook into Uplay anyway. I think as compared to Microsoft, though, one big advantage that Google does have is if they could make this be a cheap Chromecast dongle that's maybe just a little bit more expensive than a Chromecast Max, then that actually could allow for a pretty wide hardware adoption from an audience that currently is not being into gaming. But if you want to appeal to existing gamers, it does seem like Microsoft have a bit of a leg up. I think there's then also the question of profitability. Do Google care about it, or is this primarily a growth-focused play to establish them in a new market? Ultimately, they want as many Google devices getting as much information on you as they can, because more than most companies with Google, you are the product. For that reason, I find it very hard to see myself enthusiastically picking this up for my home. I might pick one up for work coverage, but at the end of the day, I try not to support Google where I can. Like, I use DuckDuckGo on my phone for a reason. I don't love Google. I don't love what's going on with the data harvesting, and for me, that is always going to be a bit of a fundamental issue with them. That said, it's not like everybody else is in a great state. Hell, the Epic Game Store, I'm pretty sure it doesn't even comply with GDPR fully, so it's all a bit iffy. But there you go. That is the situation with Google. We're going to find out very soon, but yeah, there'll be a major move into the games industry from Google. If you'd like to check out more content, there's a lot more on the channel. I think we've had 5 videos go up in the last 2 days, so there should be something there that interests you. With that, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.